Hi there and welcome. My name is Derek Feldman and I'm the president of Achieve, the research company behind the Millennial Running Study. We're excited that you're with us today for the next hour. We'll be talking about Millennial Running Study, the second phase. This is the second report out from the Millennial Running Study's work since we debuted it at the Running USA conference earlier this year in February. I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Amy Thayer, who will be with us today. She'll be sharing a lot of the insights as she's been leading the project with us to try and understand from a qualitative standpoint how and why millennial runners are participating in the way they do with various events. The Millennial Running Study is going to be available at millennialrunningstudy.com, which will share all of that at the end. We're also recording this session, so if you miss anything, there's no worries. We'll make sure and get that recording to you too. And of course, this presentation will be available to you as well to reference at a later date. We'll make sure and get that to you post this session together. We've organized this session to give you some oversight and introduction to the Millennial Running Study for those that are unfamiliar. And then from there, we're going to be talking about the specific findings and recommendations. Dr. Amy Thayer will head into that section of the research phase report. And then at the end, we're going to open it up for your questions. Feel free to put those questions into your question panel that's on your screen, and we'll make sure that we'll get to all of your questions as we go through. Of course, as we get through the sessions here, we may have more questions than we're able to answer, and we'll try and get those answered. We'll record all of those questions too and distribute it to those that attended today as well. So as I mentioned, this is the second report of the Millennial Running Study. It's phase 2. We performed the Millennial Running Study in 2 separate phases. We had a quantitative survey phase that was released in February of this year at the Running USA conference. And then in phase 2, we took all of that quantitative survey participants and started to do qualitative interviews and qualitative comparisons to understand and validate the quantitative findings. And when we look at the phase 2, as you'll see on your screen, it's really helpful that we do this process of the running study because it really helps us to examine the quantitative data. It helps us understand that why, not just what they're saying, but why they're doing it and why they're saying it. We look at trends as broken in data throughout, also looking at how gender or runner type is affecting this too. And of course, we will provide qualitative feedback from the personal interviews that our research team conducted. And in addition to that, provide quotes and other things that support the quantitative data that we had. Initially, the quantitative survey that we released data from had a little over 15,600 total respondents. And as we mentioned, when we reported the initial findings, it had a very high female audience ratio as compared to male. This is not because we were weren't trying to get a representative sample, but rather that was something we noted as consistent across the event space that we saw were highly female and millennials. As you can see there towards the bottom, you can tell the various types of runners that were participants in this study. We had only about 1% of those obstacle, fun run, mud run style folks that were a part of it. And then we had 65% were mostly your frequent fitness runners with your occasional serious competitors towards the top, and then your occasional walker joggers as well. And as you see in here, 16 interviews were conducted, nearly half female and male over the course of the qualitative portions of this, in addition to additional data comparison that we had. I mentioned the various runner types that we looked at. We categorically put them into these places here. As you can see, the serious competitive runner, vigorously training to always running the best times, all the way down to the obstacle event participant, the individual that was involved in sort of those mud fun run, beer run style types events. The serious competitive runner in the sample that we had had about 14% female and 29% male. We actually had more males in that category than we had females. In the frequent fitness runner, and as you look at the walker, jogger, recreational, both had higher female categories. And as you look at the obstacle event, it was fairly the same. So something to note as you're reviewing the research and reports here is that highly in the serious competitive, we did have more males, high females in that frequent fitness runner category. So I'm going to now turn it over to Dr. Amy Thayer, who's going to go into the findings in each of the categories of study that we looked at. And then I'll be back with you as we finish and close and talk about some of the questions. So, Dr. Amy Thayer.
Great, thanks, Derek. As in phase 1 of this study, these findings have been broken down into the 3 same categories that we looked at in phase 1: health and fitness, the experience of the running event, and then finally the philanthropic piece of running events in millennials. And so the majority of the overall sample, as found also in phase 1, reported their health as very good, while nearly equal percentages reported their health as either excellent or good. 3/4 of respondents consider themselves a healthy weight. And so most of the remaining respondents actually reported themselves as overweight. Interestingly, only a very small percentages of folks, actually less than 3% in each category, indicated that they were either underweight or obese. Additionally, although nearly 3/4 of respondents indicated that they were quote-unquote fit, the sample was nearly equally divided as respondents who were content with their fitness levels and then those who were not. The beliefs of the overall sample were similarly reflected by respondents of both genders. The majority of both female and males, as you see here, believe themselves to be in very good health. Both genders believe themselves also to be very fit, and they're split equally on their contentedness of their fitness level. Health distinctions by runner type, however, were actually quite different from the overall sample. Serious competitive runners, as you see, by far indicated the best health. The majority believe themselves to be in excellent health, as you see, 52% there. Frequent fitness runners and obstacle event participants most closely resemble the overall sample, though nearly 2/3, about 62% of obstacle event participants are not content with their fitness level, compared to 49% of the overall sample and with 48% of the frequent fitness runners. Recreational runners provided the weakest or the poorest assessment of their health of all runner types. Nearly half, about 45% actually, of respondents in this runner category indicated that their health was good, though the next largest response at 38% indicated that it was very good. So you can see by and large the sample really is focused on the fact that they feel like they're in good health, they're in good fitness levels across the board. And then more than half of respondents indicated that they were out of shape, but that they're working to improve their fitness. And like obstacle event participants, 68% are not content with their fitness level. So again, by and large, this is a group that sees themselves as very healthy, they see themselves as very fit, and the ones who may not feel as fit as they should be are continually working on improving that fitness. When asked to rank and order the 3 factors that most motivate these folks to participate in running events, phase 1 of the report was similar to phase 2 of the report. The top 3 reasons were to improve their physical health, that would be increase their fitness and decrease their weight, maintain their physical health, maintain fitness, maintain their weight, and to run in a unique or new environment. The order of the motivators remain constant across genders and across the majority of running categories. Nearly half of both female and male respondents indicated that they are most motivated to participate in running events to improve their health. Now, as you see in the second part there, serious competitive millennial runners, as well as male respondents, more than females, ranked the competitive aspects of running events as a key motivator, and recreational runners, as well as female runners, were more likely to be interested in the social nature of such running events. Millennial runners tend to believe that they are in good health. They run to maintain and improve their health above all other reasons. So for example, many of the interviewees that we talked to indicated that they began running in an effort to become healthier. They wanted to lose weight. They wanted to become more fit. And while physical health and fitness may have been the initial motivator for them to begin running, interviewees really talked to us about the mental and emotional benefits as factors of running that allowed them to continue to run. And so as you see here, running for this group, I think we talked about this maybe in phase 1 as well, it really is a part of their identity. As the next male millennial runner said, it pretty much gave him a reason to get up in the morning. And then finally, running is a part of my routine, it's a part of my day, And beyond the physical aspect, there's the added mental and emotional health benefits. And what they talked about time and time again was the fact that running allowed them to really quiet their mind. It allowed them to disconnect from what was going on in their daily lives, what was going on at work, maybe some stressful events, and really just take care of themselves so that they were better able, excuse me, to take care of others in their lives. And so as we look at the recommendations from this particular section of the report, considering health and fitness benefits of running, we would tell event directors maybe to consider how you cultivate relationships with millennial runners who participate in your events. When you communicate with them and you're planning events for this generation of runners, really strive to incorporate elements of personalization. So again, it's a part of their identity. They want people to know them. They want you to understand what they're interested in. And then one of the things that they are interested in are the elements of mental and emotional health. So provide opportunities for them to learn and practice aspects of maybe meditation, yoga, as a part of your running event, so that you're able to incorporate both the physical challenges that they're looking for in your events as well as the mental and emotional health benefits that come from running. And so the experience part of the findings section was really dedicated to understanding, first of all, what did millennial runners appreciate about running events? What kind of events were they wanting to run? What things did they not appreciate so much? And so when we look at this aspect of the findings, we find that as in phase one, in the general sample of this study, half marathons and 5Ks, as well as 10Ks, actually rounded out the top 3 most popular event lengths. And that was true for the majority of millennial runners. That's true for the events that they're running or that they had run in the previous 12 months, as well as events that they wanted to participate in the upcoming year. So we asked millennial runners to indicate how they learned about events that they may be interested in running. And so, as this slide indicates, both social media and internet searches were the top 2 ways in which that millennial runners learned about potential events that they would want to run. As you can see, social media was most highly rated by female millennial runners, frequent fitness runners, recreational runners, and obstacle event participants, whereas male millennials and serious competitive runners use the internet searches to really seek out the events that they might be interested in participating. When we looked at social media, Facebook was actually the most popular social network across gender and all types of running events, and so, across all types of runners. And so when we looked at Facebook, I believe it was 95% or above of folks used Facebook to find out about a running event. That was followed by Twitter and Instagram. And so when we asked them, what are the elements of an event that would influence your participation? What would make you really want to participate? What's not so important in your participation? And what do you really not care about that an event has to offer that would make it a make or break decision for you to run that event? And across all categories, we found that event distance, the cost of an event, and being able to see instant results of your participation in that event were the 3 constants that transgressed all running groups, whether it be male, female, or the type of runner that they were. As you can also see, all groups except recreational runners wanted to run in events that were timed. They want to know how they're doing. They're interested in their personal best time. They're interested in breaking times that they had done previously. And most groups also cared about the quality of the branded items and the giveaways that the event provided them. And so when we look at male versus female runners in the same category to figure out what are their type elements, they're very similar, but when you look at the male millennial runner, the 5 things that really influenced their decision whether or not they wanted to participate in an event, running event distance was number 1, timed events were number 2, the cost of a running event was the 3rd consideration, the 4th consideration was whether or not they received those instant results at the end of the race, and then finally, they wanted to know that they could receive timing alerts throughout the race to know what their progress looked like. As I said, the female millennial runners, very similar but in a different order. Their number 1 concern was what was the running event distance, and did they want to run that length of a race. Number 2 was the cost of a running event, was it affordable? 3, their 3rd most important consideration was whether instant results were provided as they finished the event. And then finally, timed events and the quality of other event branded items and giveaways were most popular and rounded out female millennial runners' top 5 reasons for selecting a race. Interestingly, I think when we think of millennials, we think they're very much brand champions. They're very brand loyal. And so I think that common sense was that they would participate in events that were sponsored by brands that they really supported. and that social media feeds, because they're digitally, what we consider digital natives, and they're very connected, that those two things would be very important based on what we know about the millennial generation in general. And that was not the case when we surveyed and interviewed millennial runners in particular. These two things did not seem to even be on the radar. They were not of interest at all to the millennial runners in this study. And so this is an aspect that we actually honed in a bit on when we conducted interviews as a part of the qualitative phase of this study. Millennial runners are most likely to participate in events that were well organized. They wanted to know that they had information on where they needed to be on the day of the event, where the water stops would be, what the course looked like prior to running. They wanted to run an event that provided a challenge, either for them for their physical fitness or for their health, or also so that they could achieve a personal best. They didn't want to continue to run the same old course. They really wanted to be challenged each time out. And finally, they wanted to participate in events that offered new or interesting scenery to them. And in fact, in the report you'll read, that is one of the considerations that they use, the travel to an event, where they talk about shorter races, they're not willing to travel as far, but if they are going to travel to a race, say a half marathon, a marathon, they often incorporate social aspects that are important to that trip as well. And so they may plan vacations around it. And so these three things, well-organized, challenge, and interesting scenery, were among the top elements that made an event most likely for a millennial to participate in. And so you can see here just a selection of qualitative quotes that we pulled from our interviews. The middle quote, being at an event is able to push yourself. You see here the challenge that they're looking for. You've got a goal, you're trying to beat your previous self, you want to improve yourself, and that's what really pushes me. This is what an event can offer a millennial to satisfy this interest. And finally, I think the top quote is very exemplary of all the findings that we found in this particular section. If your event has bad reviews, they won't sign up for it. If you don't have good volunteers, and that's probably a key point that we'll talk about in the next section of the report, but if you don't have good volunteers at an event, or if people report that an event website that it was poorly planned, poorly executed, they're not interested in running. So in the next section, we'll talk about how that translates into what they can offer an event as well. So finally, the recommendations for this section. When looking at running events, it's clear that half marathons are the most favored and the most completed by millennial runners, and that is followed by the 5K and 10K events. The runners learned about races primarily through internet searches and social media, with Facebook and Twitter and Instagram being in the top three, although serious competitive runners also favor the internet over social media. And so when you consider all of these things together, our recommendations to event directors may be: consider incorporating the events that millennial runners deem the most important. For example, take into account the running event distance, the cost of the event, as well as the instant results and the quality of the swag, if you will, that they're able to take away from the event. Secondly, diversify the outlets through which you market your events. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, as I said, were the most popular platforms that people use or that millennials use to understand what event they might want to run. But also ensure that your event utilizes digital marketing and it's available on a good internet search to capture those more competitive runners that may be interested in running your event. Finally, use appropriate channel based for the type of runner that your event is hoping to attract. So if you're looking for, if your event is highly competitive, make sure that you're represented in the internet and not just on social media. And then lastly, focus on creating a well-organized event and share that information about the course, about the event in advance. Millennial runners really appreciate the ability to be prepared, and that's something that came through resoundingly in our interviews with them. They have set expectations for going into the race, and so the day of organization ranks actually very highly with this generation of runners. They want to know what to expect. So take time and care to ensure that your event is well staffed with appropriate volunteers, water stations, etc. And finally, the charity and volunteering aspect of our findings. This part was to some surprising and to others not so much. Again, what we know about the millennial generation is that they're a generation of do-gooders. They want to donate their time, their talent, their treasure to things that matter to them. They're very cause-driven, cause-oriented generation. However, that wasn't found to be true with running events. Through personal interviews, millennial runners repeatedly indicated that they participated in a running event that supported a cause or charity, but that wasn't the primary reason that they participated. As you see here, the difference between male and females. Female respondents were more likely than males to have chosen to participate in a running event because of the charitable aspect of that event. By runner type, recreational runners, walkers, and joggers were much more likely than any other type of runner to participate in an event due to the cause or charity that the event was supporting. So while nearly 2/3 of males and more than half of female millennial runners indicated that participating in running events was not their primary way to support causes or charity. More than 2/3 of women, compared to less than 2/3 of men, indicated that they planned to participate in running events that supported a cause or charity in the near future. Likewise, 81% of runner, walker, joggers also indicated that they would run an event that supported a cause or a charity in the next 1 or 2 years. So this is all to say cause and charity events associated with running events is not a dead, it's not a moot point, but it's just not the main avenue that millennials use to support the cause or charity of their choice. And so when we investigate the volunteering aspect of millennials, through personal interviews, the millennial runners repeatedly indicated that volunteers are an aspect of a well-run event. As I said, they want to know that the event is well organized, that volunteers are where they should be, that water stations are where they should be. However, when asked about their own volunteering at running events, millennial runners were not overly involved, although they did provide valuable insight about how those events might be able to recruit them, such as the last quote there that says, "I would probably volunteer more if volunteering saves you a spot in next year's race or a future race." Only about 1/3 of males and females both have ever volunteered for a running event. However, nearly half, at about 45% of serious competitive runners, have volunteered for a running event. So you can sort of see the disparities across groups there. All other running types were less than 1/3 who had volunteered at running events. So of those who have ever volunteered, the primary responsibility was really the day of tasks. So if you're looking to engage millennials up front before the day of the event, there's some work to do there. Excuse me. So in making recommendations for this particular phase of the study, or these particular findings, what we would say is that consider creating partnerships with a cause or charity as a part of your event. This is particularly true when you're looking at maybe the 5K races, the 10Ks. If you're a longer length event, you may not need to even bring in a cause or a charity. If you're considering doing that because you think it's a draw to the millennial runner, that's not necessarily the case, is what we found. Number two, if you can provide easy opportunities for millennial runners to volunteer with groups, and they really want to volunteer with groups of their own making. So they want to come to an event as a constructed group that they've identified, and that's mostly friends and family members who have either participated in the event previously or that they are participating in a future event altogether. And then finally, the best incentive, or the strongest incentive, I guess I should say, that was offered, that millennials thought or believed that would be an additional incentive for them to volunteer for your event, was the fact if you could provide free or reduced registrations. And that could be for a future event, that could be for a future event of yours, it could be in tandem with another event. But they are really runners at heart, that's their identity, and so the best incentive that you could provide was really to provide them free or reduced registration so that they could continue running events of interest to them. All right, so the recommendations of the overall findings of this section. First and foremost, millennial runners run to promote health, prevent disease, and find mental clarity. So running is an activity that millennials have identified as an efficient way to benefit not only their physical health, but also a way to sustain their mental and emotional health. So first, they participate in running as a way to lose weight and become fit, but then they also use it to decompress and think. Running is a part of who they are and how they see themselves and how they represent themselves. So the recommendation here would really be in your event materials, your communications with the millennial runners, sponsors that you bring into the events, really have them speak to healthy lifestyles, both physical and emotional. You may want to focus on the whole person development because, as I said, this is a part of their identity. It's not a piece of their identity. They really do seem to embody the title of runner or the role of runner. Secondly, the data from this phase of the research continues to reveal that the half marathon is by far the most popular event. But when you look across runner types and among runners of both genders, there's a trend for the runner to want to increase the distance of their event as they move on in the subsequent 12 months. So above all, millennial runners seem to gravitate toward and to become loyal to events that are well organized before and during the event. So the recommendation here is pretty clear. Take time and care to ensure that your event is well staffed and that appropriate numbers of volunteers and water stations are available and that the runner knows where they are available. And please make sure that this information is communicated in advance of participation in the event. And then finally, most millennial runners don't select the event as a means to support a specific cause or charity, right? We found that out in phase 1, and that continued to come through in phase 2 of this study. They don't participate in running events because of the philanthropic aspect, and they don't, at least large numbers of them have not reported as being volunteers of events, but they would like to do so. And if they do so, you need to provide opportunities that they can volunteer in groups of their own choosing, friends, family members, and that as an incentive, they're able to receive a free or reduced entrance fee or registration fee to an upcoming event. And so the recommendation here is really that when communicating with millennial runners, we really need to talk about the importance of volunteers. It's something that they genuinely valued. It's something that they found made the event more well-run and more well-orchestrated. However, we need to encourage them to give back as a way to create quality experiences and meaningful experiences for the folks who are running the event if they're not, as a way of paying it forward, if you will. So to assist in the success of the ask and the uptake, if you will, provide opportunities for millennial runners to volunteer as a part of a group, again, of their choosing, and provide those valuable incentives that they have indicated really make a difference to them on whether or not they're going to volunteer for an event. Great. And now I'll turn it back over to Derek.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. So there are some questions coming in, so that would be great if you have any questions to make sure that you put those into your question panel here. Amy, can you go back to the last slide, because there's a question related to that too as well, which is around cause or charity. One of the questions coming in is states, so are you recommending that event organizers should not have any cause or charity affiliated with it? What do you think?
I would say no, I'm not recommending that. I don't think that the data support that. I think if you are going to associate a cause or a charity with your event, be very thoughtful about who your event participants are and whether or not that's something that they're seeking. Because what we found is that they will in fact support the cause or charity. They will do it hands down, but it's not the primary reason why they're selecting your event.
Yeah. Another question that's come in is, earlier you mentioned around, well, I'm going to carry on with this question too, because this individual had several, which is in partnering with charity, it seems that, that this may not be as important. And since it's labor intensive, what are your kind of options? Or are you recommending that you do partner, but maybe look at expectations? It kind of seems that way too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, this is a question around the respondents, and actually this was covered, something that we covered in the quantitative piece, that 79% of the respondents were white. What race directors can do to diversify the field. That's a very good piece. We mentioned this early on, that the respondents were white, were female as well, and something that we noted in the event space. Amy, can you put up the next slide that actually has where the study you can download it from, because that question is coming in here too as well. And then finally, the study mentions growth to 2013 and steady in 2014 and 15 numbers dropped. How can race directors incorporate this downward trend into planning going forward? Any thoughts that came through in your interviews, Amy?
And I'm sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of that question.
So the study mentions growth to 2013 and steady in 2014. 2015 numbers dropped. How can race directors incorporate the downward trend in planning going forward?
Mm-hmm. That's a tough question. I know that's something that we talked about at the Running USA conference as well, formally and informally throughout the few days that we were there. I think one, evidence-based from this particular study suggestion would be just to really hone in on those things that they're interested in, the challenge of the event, the opportunity, to better their times, the scenery that's involved, so maybe shaking up the course a little bit if you're able to do that. And then really, I would say, start to minimize and curtail the things that they're really not that interested in. And so perhaps efforts and resources can be put to the things that they've identified as being make or break, and not so much towards the things that they could kind of do without.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, this next question is what do you think about the perceived value of a 5K or half marathon? Is there an ideal range for pricing? Was that covered in the quantitative?
It was actually, and that's in the report. In phase 1, I remember looking at it. I think the ideal price was irrespective of the event that they wanted to run. I believe $50 was the most popular price point. And of course, that the registration fees went up a bit as the event length went up a bit. So folks, running half marathons, marathons were a bit more willing to pay more than $50. But by and large, across all types of events, $50 was kind of the sweet spot for registration.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not that's feasible, I don't know, but that's what the findings show.
And this from the same person was wondering, did you pull on the surface of the event? For instance, the road versus the trail, for example.
We did not. No, we did not ask those.
And this question comes from Eric. He's asking around the 1% identity and the obstacle course events, mentioning that because our phase 1 partners included endurance events. Yeah, I should have clarified that. You're right, Eric. The research partners that were a part of this, which you can see in the quantitative report, were endurance events. However, when it was distributed, obviously we look at whether or not the individuals participated in other style types of events. Most of them obviously in the endurance side. And the study was originally set up not to look at the obstacle event style races, which is something for further study that we identified in the report and mentioned it at the Running USA conference. But thanks, Eric, to make sure I clarify that. The next one is how can you engage early millennial runners? Marco has a question. Amy, what are your thoughts? I think it may go back to some of the recommendations that you had here too. Maybe if you want to put some of those up.
Sure. I think what the findings showed us was health was by far, honestly, health and fitness was by far, both the maintenance of and the improvement of were by and large the reasons why they got involved. And I think that that will continue to be stronger as you move down the millennial line, if you will, so that younger millennials probably are a bit more focused on that than maybe the oldest of the millennials. So okay. I think if there are ways to incorporate both physical and mental, I think the mental concept is going to be particularly important to those younger folks.
Great. Well, it kind of goes into now around entertainment and things. So let me know if this came up in the studies as well as, do you think adding extras like parties and beer trucks are things that attract more? The after parties, ? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a hard one because you'll have to look in the report because I do believe that we provided a few quotes in this area as well. Some people that we spoke to said that that absolutely was important. They were looking for the party afterwards. But I think in the quantitative piece of it, the survey piece, that wasn't as high up on the list as the other factors, but it was definitely something that if it was gone, the evidence would show that they would miss it.
Yeah, and same thing with bands or entertainment. Anything else that came with that?
I think those kinds of things, when you look at the report, you'll see, again, they are of interest and they may be more equivocal. The findings may be more equivocal because I'm not sure that we have a sense of whether to keep or to get rid of. I think they enjoy it, but it's not necessary for them to choose an event.
Yeah, so now we have a historical comparative here question. So the question is do you think 30-year-olds that were 30 in 1980 per se had the same motives to participate in events that 30-year-olds today are? So trying to look at the historical perspective. Now, obviously, this didn't do a comparative, but anything come up during the qualitative phases that you can talk to about how this may have changed?
Mm-hmm. That's a really, really good question. I'm not sure how to answer that, not having the comparison. From the qualitative findings, my sense would be that many of those must-haves are probably no different. And I think throughout the fact that they're not necessarily interested in sponsors as much as other things, they're not necessarily interested in the social media things that you would really attribute to the millennial generation today, those weren't important. So I would say my sense is, based on those data, that it's not that different. You know, they want a quality experience, as probably folks did back in 1980, right, where they could challenge themselves, and that remains true today.
Yeah. The question also came up around anything you heard relative to costume or themed runs through the qualitative or quantitative parts of the study?
Yeah, that one is really difficult because that was not, as you know, the fun runs were not a part of this study. They're beyond the scope of the study. I will say the closest thing that we have in qualitative that we found in that area were there were particular runs at a specific time of year. So there may be like a holiday run, right? Whether it be Thanksgiving, Halloween, that type of thing, that folks continue to run year after year after year. And those were about the only events that they said that they would continuously do because of that aspect of it, right? Because it's at a particular time of year, the focus is the same each year.
Got it. Makes sense. All right. So then we have another question. Why do millennials not run and what else are they doing? Well, they could be doing a lot of stuff, but were there any reasons why they didn't run or participate? Any non-participation information you received in either phase?
You know, that's a hard question because when you think about the sample of this study were millennial runners, folks that have participated in running events. Um, so I can speak to why maybe the runners aren't running, right? So a lot of people spoke to the fact that whether they had health conditions or if life got a little too stressful, running seemed to be one of the first things that they would give up initially, but then they had to bring it back in to help with that, you know, the emotional and the meditative aspect of health that running provides. So as far as commenting on folks who are not running, we don't really have that data available to make a fair comparison. So I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah. This is a good question here. This is around after doing the two phases, is there anything that needs to be explored more based upon your opinion of performing the qualitative and the quantitative?
That's a great question. I would be very interested in finding out, again, back to the meditative and the emotional health aspect of this. If I could delve more deeply into any aspect of this study, it would be the health piece, because as I said, resoundingly, that was the reason why they run, which, you know, common sense wise, intuitively, that makes very good sense, right? Um, but if we could delve more deeply into this area and find out really what other things are they doing to promote physical health, to reduce their disease, you know, what are their eating habits? Now, we did ask specific questions about that in the qualitative phase, also in the quantitative phase briefly, but I would like to you know, get a more full picture, if you will, or a fuller picture of what it looks like in terms of fitness and health, both physical and emotional. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that, frankly.
Yeah, yeah. And in kind of pieces here, do you think it's worthy? This next one is there a study or interest in looking at the fun run obstacle runs at all? I think we mentioned that in at Running USA that there is some interest as well as we should look at a comparative potentially as well, right, Amy? Looking at a comparative from these kind of participants to those.
Yes, and I think in addition to that, it may be interesting to see how many of these folks that are included in this, you know, we did target them based on the fact that they were running, you know, more quote unquote more competitive events. But it would be interesting to see how many of these folks also participate in the fun runs. Do they use them, you know, um, to maintain their running? Do they use it as a fun outlet? Do they, you know, like what is the purpose of the fun run, and do they participate in them? So yes, and also I think Running USA included fun runs as a part of their research that they did.
Got it. Next question is from Tim. Does high quality t-shirts or custom medals positively influence registrations?
Yeah, that's interesting. And so that's one part. You can look at the qualitative, or excuse me, the quantitative findings, the survey findings in that area. Um, so yes, I would say when you talk, there was one slide in particular that said like recreational runners were more interested in the swag and females were more interested in the swag. However, I distinctly remember from the qualitative phase of this interviewing folks, lots and lots of people said that yes, it might not be a make or break, but they always check to see what it is, and they
So it's a
always
value
appreciate it when
add.
they get it at the end.
Yeah, so it's a
I think it's a
value
value
add to
add.
the
Yes, very well put.
experience based
Yeah,
upon
yeah,
based
very
upon.
well put.
Yeah, so here's a really good question that probably so many are wondering. How do you balance the needs and wants of millennials versus the rest of the attendees, specifically even for a women's event? But you know, the first part of here is just how do you work with this or type of runner, but yet how you have all different other types too as well? Anything come through in the qualitative or quantitative you can talk to?
Yeah, I think I think that's a great question. That's probably a great question across sectors right now that the millennials are really, coming into their own and coming into adulthood. Um, my answer is based on the findings of the study, and so that's how I'll answer it. But the core elements of these events, I don't think are unique to millennials, frankly. They're what any kind of runner, competitive runner, really wants to see in an event. I think the mode through which you communicate to millennials might be different, and I think certain aspects of the elements of events may be a bit different, but I think those elements are by and large the same, and that would be appreciated by boomers, Xers, millennials. So I know that's not a very specific answer, but I think as you read the report, it will come through whether you're, like I said, whether you're a boomer or a millennial, you probably have very similar interests in a lot of these things.
Yeah. What did you find out about races with groups and friends, signups and registrations together? Did they tend to sign up together as groups, or was this more individualistic behavior that you noticed in the quantitative and qualitative?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't believe that we asked it in the quantitative, but it is something that we used for further discussion in the qualitative. And so what I would say is a lot of the folks that I spoke to did sign up for events with other people. Did they run that event with those people? No. And so I distinctly remember one quote that a young lady told me. She said, I'll sign up with him, her husband, and her brother-in-law, but once that gun goes off, it's every man for himself. I'm gone. So
Yeah.
it's not necessarily that they're looking for the social aspect while they're running, but yes, I think that running with friends, again, perhaps because of the after event, parties and things like that, they're able to socialize with them, but the running really is strictly running.
Let's go back to the sponsors piece, which you mentioned. I think there was some information also in the quantitative. Can you remind everybody what we found around sponsors and millennial runners?
Um, so we did not ask very specific questions. We didn't ask about specific sponsors. But what I can tell you is that that is something in constructing this study that we thought they would be very interested in. And what we found was it wasn't. It wasn't, and the findings actually weren't that interesting around sponsorship. And so there really is no data to kind of say, you may want to get sponsors that are focused in this area. So my answer, I guess, is more indirect, is that if you look at the findings by themselves, their interest in health, their interest in having specific elements of the event, maybe choose your sponsors, select your sponsors in that way, right? Sponsors that may be dedicated to health and fitness. And it might not necessarily be indicative of a specific sponsor, but it may be more indicative of sectors of sponsors, if you will.
Right. So matching up, as you mentioned, with since it's about personal fitness, health, mental, then looking and find sponsors that align with those and focus on the individual experience within that, some activations or others as well.
Great. Very well
Yeah.
put. Yes.
So this one, anything around race photos that came up in the quantitative or qualitative parts of the study?
Anything about race? What?
Race photos,
Oh,
anything? Yeah.
no. I would agree with your previous statement. I think it's a value add, but it's not critical.
Yeah. So back to the volunteerism piece, what were two things on volunteerism that you would recommend for event organizers and millennials, related to millennials?
As far as attracting them to your event, I think you have to capitalize on the fact, again, that they are interested in charity, they're interested in being philanthropic. And so as an individual who appreciates the volunteers of the events that they run, really hone into the fact that they too can give back. Right, that's one way that they can be charitable. They can come and be an event volunteer, and I think that's something that may speak to this group because, as I said, they valued it and they are charitable. So that may be a good match there. And then additionally, I think more than any other kind of incentive, it really was the free or reduced registration to another event because they're interested in trying out new events that they may not have been able to do previously, and so a free or reduced registration would facilitate them trying a new event or venue.
Now, this
For
question's
those two things.
gotcha. This question's around CrossFit and other types of training programs. Do you think CrossFit and things like that have taken away from millennial running? Did that come up in the study? Seems like a lot of millennials go to the gym, run on the treadmill, do weightlifting, group training kind of things. Did anything come up in the interviews or the quantitative around other activities of more interest, like CrossFit or things like that?
Yeah, actually, we did. In the quantitative, we asked other activities that they participated in. Um, and so, and I apologize, I don't have the report right in front of me, but from memory, I can remember they swam, they did mountain biking, and there was a general sense I remember we commented on in the first report that again that outdoor kind of scenery type of thing was really important. In addition to like the person posing the question said, the weightlifting, the running on a treadmill. But then we did. So if you check out phase one, it'll detail the other physical activities that they participated in to augment their running.
Okay. And then things like registration, I think this is probably part of the quantitative piece. Would race entry into the 5K in the next year work, or does it need to be closer to the event? Did you remember anything around race registration and early into the next year?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I
Yeah,
understand the
so
question. So are you
so
asking like the timeline to register?
well, it would be would race entry to the 5K in the next
Mhm.
year work, or does it need to be closer to the event? They're trying to get more millennial runners.
Oh, I see. Into a 5K.
Yeah, yeah. Do you
Yeah, I
remember
think
anything came up?
no, the only thing I would say is that the 5K, huge amounts of participation by millennials in 5Ks, right? Because it's a way that from the qualitative interviews that they said they'd use 5K as a quick, 3.5 mile run that they needed to get in on a weekday, or, so they gave up their Tuesday run to run this event on a Saturday, so they could have the 5K. So I would just reiterate that the 5K was among the top three event lengths. And so, yes, I think that will continue to either maintain its popularity or continue to increase in the future.
So let's talk about different segments of millennials here because we're getting some questions around this too. One of them that you covered a little bit, or that we covered early on, is around male and female. But is there anything around geography? I mean, did the studies show anything around a runner living in the West Coast having different preferences and interests than somebody, say, on the East Coast?
That's really interesting. My sense is we did collect that data. When looking at it initially, there was not great variation in region, and so that's why it's not included in the findings section of the report. That would be interesting. Came out in the qualitative when we talked to folks in different regions, and we did try to be thoughtful about selecting people across the country to see if there were differences. To be quite honest, most of the qualitative feedback that we got um, was around weather conditions, and how they would train, in certain areas because the weather was not so ideal in the winter, in the Northeast,
Hmm.
that type of things. But no, nothing that stood out enough to include in the findings.
And if
Pretty
I'm
unremarkable.
Yeah, if I'm correct, the research partners were distributed nationwide, right? And so this was out of the 15,600 or so, it was pretty evenly distributed in the US. Is that right?
It was, I wouldn't say it's evenly distributed. I believe that it was distributed based on population of those areas. And
Got
so, in an effort to be representative.
got it. Got it. Is there this next question is around who the event organizer is. Is there any preference by millennials to participate in events that are organized by a for-profit or a nonprofit? Did that come up at all?
No, but that's a great question. No, we didn't investigate that, but that is a great question.
Gotcha. And then when it comes to the sponsorship piece again, as we mentioned, that tie into health and so on, do you think if sponsors created a piece of the event that would focus on, say, mental health or any of those other categories, I'm adding that in there, would that draw attendees as well?
Based on these findings, I would say absolutely yes.
Gotcha. Great. In terms of the quantitative data, will you be refreshing that throughout the year? Is the next question.
I will just say that that had not been the plan as of right now, but anything is possible. So
That's right.
I know that we don't just want to let this study die, so there are opportunities.
That's great. Yeah, and I believe the study was established so that this could be a benchmark year as well, right? So you can continue to look at how this may change over time.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
All right. So we have time for one more before we depart here. The question is there anything about length or time before sign up? Do millennials tend to wait closer to the event to make a decision to actually sign up? Did you hear anything in the
That is a
qualitative or
great question.
quantitative?
Yes, in fact, we did. And that was covered actually in phase one. And that was one of those findings that at Running USA folks were very, very surprised about. Millennials actually don't wait till the last minute to sign up for an event. They're actually very thoughtful and very deliberate. And first of all, selecting an event that they want to run and then signing up far in advance. And I believe it is as much as 3 months in advance. So
Kind of.
if you're thinking that the millennials looking at it a week ahead, no, they're actually quite deliberate in pre-planning.
Great. With this particular endurance audience, or this the audience that we were
Right,
having. Yeah, absolutely.
right.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Thayer, for this great information. We have if you can download the study, you can download it at the millennialrunningstudy.com. Post this session, which is recorded, will provide you not only with this recording, but the presentation that you saw here today. I thank you for all the time that you shared with us today on this last 50 minutes. And of course, if you have any questions about the data, feel free to respond back to the email that you get following this webinar. Thank you again, and we look forward to keeping you updated with any information that comes through with ongoing studies. Take care.